Steve Jobs met Wozniak through a friend in high school, and they both worked together at the computer company, or technology company, Hewlett-Packard, or HP, for quite a bit of time. Their first project together was when Jobs was working at a company called Atari, and they created a video game called Breakout, which is an expansion from the previously popular video game Pong. Now, over time, Wozniak started seeing the new computers rise up in the early age, and he wanted his own microcomputer, so he started the Apple I with Steve Jobs, and it led to the creation of the Apple company.
In an attempt to construct computers for his friends, Jobs went to a computer hardware store named the Byte Shop to borrow some spare parts. With the spare parts, Jobs and Woz created about 100 Apple I's, which were extremely popular. After noticing the popularity of the Apple I, an investor, Mike Markkula, invested $92,000 into the Apple Computer Company. After the investment, Apple Computers Incorporated was founded by Ron Wayne, Steve Jobs, and Steve Wozniak.
Shortly after Apple was incorporated, they sold the Apple II for $1,295. The Apple II turned out to be a huge success for Apple and was the backbone of the company for almost half a decade. Apple was a very small company at this time, and it only had 31 employees, but it was producing high-quality products. Shortly after Apple II, Apple began working on their newest project, Lisa, which was named after Steve Jobs' daughter. Now, the product was not a success for Apple because Jobs described it as not fitting into the demands of the customers, and it did not sell due to its high price.
So we produced a product that was a complete mismatch for the culture of our company, for the image of our company, for the distribution channels of our company, for our current customers. None of them could afford a product like that. And it failed.
While working on the Lisa, Apple hired Jeff Raskin, who went on to create the Macintosh project, which would produce a portable computer. Jobs, interested in his company, disliked the Macintosh in its early stages. He forced himself into the Macintosh team and later took charge of the group. After 3 years of hard work, Jobs and the Macintosh team constructed the first completely packaged computer. Shortly after, Jobs demanded that Raskin leave Apple Inc. Raskin went on to resign from Apple. The Macintosh sold 2 years later at $2,495.
And so I formed a small team to do the Macintosh. And, we were on a mission from God, to save Apple. No one else thought so, but it turned out we were right. And as we evolved the Mac, it became very clear that this was also a way of reinventing Apple. We reinvented everything. We reinvented manufacturing. I visited probably 80 automated factories in Japan, and we built the world's first automated computer factory in the world in California.
As CEO of Apple, Steve Jobs was never known for his kindness. He was known strictly for his success. Some of his employees hated his frankness, and oftentimes he harshly criticized their work.
When you tell someone their work is shit?
It usually means their work is shit. Sometimes it means I think your work is shit, and I'm wrong. But usually it means their work is not anywhere near good.
He despised workers who slacked off and didn't do their job, and he only wanted the best people to work with him for his company.
I've built a lot of my success off finding these truly gifted people and not settling for B and C players, but really going for the A players. And I found something. I found that when you get enough A players together, when you go through the incredible work to find 5 of these A players, they really like working with each other because they've never had a chance to do that before. And they don't want to work with B and C players, and so it becomes self-policing, and they only want to hire more A players. And so you build up these pockets of A players, and it propagates. And that's what the Mac team was like. They were all A players.
The company off to a great start. Apple Computers Incorporated decided to go public, and their shares went up 32% on the first day, making all of their employees millionaires. Shortly after this, the original investor in the company, Mike Markkula, becomes the president of Apple. With this and the product success Apple had, they were the leader in the computer industry. But they did have two main rivals, IBM and Xerox. Both of these companies created products that were similar to Apple, and they showed great interest in the company. In fact, Xerox actually invested $1 million into Apple. At the time of the Macintosh and Lisa release, IBM was mass-producing PCs and was becoming a big challenge in the market to Apple. Another main computer company, Microsoft, under their president, Bill Gates, was also producing products similar to Apple. Bill Gates had shown early interest in working with Jobs, but Jobs did not want to work with Gates.
In response to the popularity of IBM and Xerox, Apple put out the 1984 commercial, which aired only one time during the 1984 Super Bowl. The commercial cleverly alluded to the idea that IBM was similar to Big Brother, and that it tried to force its products onto the public. It aimed to get the consumer to break away from the popularity of IBM and choose Apple. Here is that commercial.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests, obeying contradictory reports. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
A year before the 1984 commercial aired during the Super Bowl, Steve Jobs convinced then PepsiCo president John Sculley to join his company Apple as president and CEO. Although Jobs thought it was a good idea at first, the two of them never fully agreed on many things that went on in Apple, and it caused tension to rise in the company. 2 years after Sculley arrived in the company, Jobs tried to push Sculley out of the company. The attempt turned out to be a failure, and Sculley stripped Jobs of all of his duties in Apple. Jobs' office went on to be called Siberia because, well, nothing really happened there anymore. Jobs was almost depressed over what happened at Apple. Shortly after, he resigned from Apple because he didn't have very much things to do at Apple anymore, and went on with some of his Macintosh team members to create his new company called Next.
Your departure from Apple? Oh, it was very painful. I'm not even sure I want to talk about it. What can I say? I hired the wrong guy.
That was Sculley?
Yeah. And he destroyed everything I'd spent 10 years working for. Starting with me, but that wasn't the saddest part. I would have gladly left Apple if Apple would have turned out like I'd wanted it to.
Without Jobs, Apple Computers Incorporated stumbled. There was a major lack of leadership in the company, and the corporation suffered as a result. During this time, Apple failed to produce the types of products that made it a success in the first place. This lack of productivity resulted in a chance for IBM and Xerox to make up ground in the computer industry. Apple CEO John Sculley agreed to an alliance with IBM, and together they created the PowerPC, which was a processor for computers. With this processor, Apple released the first Power Mac.
Over 10 years after Jobs departed from Apple, Apple bought Jobs back to the Apple company. Apple bought Jobs' company called Next for $430 million and planned to use his ideas to bring Apple back to its former self. Steve Jobs returned to the company as just an advisor, but he moved up in ranks until he became the CEO of Apple. As CEO, Jobs wanted to reform the company to what he would think make it successful. With Jobs back as the CEO of the company, Apple returned to its former self like Apple had wanted, and it yet again became a powerhouse in the computer industry.
Over at Apple, that boat was sinking. The fruit company, which made computers for the masses, was in the midst of its worst year ever, taking a beating from none other than the Gates gang. After the release of Windows 95, the Mac, which turned profitable, but which had failed to evolve for a decade while Steve Jobs was away, started losing market share at an alarming rate. By 1996, the company's newly appointed CEO, Gil Amelio, was looking for new software to replace the old and bloated Mac OS. After much thought, he eventually chose Steve's next step, believing that if anyone could turn it around, it would be Jobs.
I think the original idea was that Apple would try to use Steve Jobs. And that was a naive idea that you think that you can be the one to take advantage of Steve Jobs. That's not how it works with Steve Jobs. You are not going to be the person who's taking advantage of him.
When Steve came back, he knew exactly what to do. He canceled the licensing agreements and took it right back to the way it was when he was running out.
Apple continued work on the Power Mac, and it turned out to be a very successful product. Building off of its success, Apple went on to create an iBook in 1999, a laptop computer. By now, Apple was richer than ever and had money to spend in all departments. 2 years after the iBook, they created the iPod, and shortly after, the iPod Nano. Along with the iPod came iTunes, a media store that sold music, games, and other applications for Apple products. iTunes was a big success for Apple and brought in the most revenue out of any product at the time. Even today, iTunes is still a marketplace that people use very often and remains successful.
In the early part of the 2000 to 2009 decade, there was a huge demand for cell phones around the world. Apple began to work on their newest product, iPhone, which released in 2005. The iPhone became a product that in some ways changed the world. The iPhone changed the way that people communicated with each other. The product allowed for people to go onto the internet, check their email, and even play games whenever they felt like it. It revolutionized the idea of a phone to the masses, and its concepts are still used in the iPhones being made today.
Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
So, say you're watching Pirates of the Caribbean. Did
The
somebody
iPhone,
say,
like the Macintosh computers, ran the complete operating system on it. It was revolutionary because it allowed the user to accomplish tasks from
Closest
anywhere
would be-
that used to require a computer to complete.
Ah.
The next big thing at Apple, following the release of the initial iPhone, was the iPad. The iPad was released on April of 2010. Jobs wanted to create the tablet to find a device that fit somewhere between a laptop and a smartphone. Like the iPhone, it runs the complete operating system, as does iMac. The iPad excels in small, quick tasks and provides much of the same functionality as a desktop computer. Jobs mentioned that he believes one day the tablet will overtake the popularity of the desktop computer, one of the things he worked so hard to complete in the first place.